Hey there. I would love to share today a little bit about the DIY PhD and some of the features that make our program unique and a little inside view as to how we structure class and what the focus is of the first 4 months in our 8 month program. And before I start going into that, I just want to say thank you to every person who's taken the DIY PhD year one course, or before that, the 3 month workshops that David and I first did together. Shout out to David Whitaker, co creator of the DIY PhD, that we started back in 2013. And a thank you to everyone who did the cohort at the Women's Center for Creative Work, now Feminist Center for Creative Work, um, and every person that just stopped and said, "Whoa, that's a cool idea," or leaned in and gave interest to what a DIY PhD could look like and be in the world. So, deep, heartfelt thank you to every single person that has supported myself in creating this and being able to devote my full time attention to pulling these educations forward in a community of such loving, brilliant, visionary people who care deeply for the planet and for the liberation of all beings here. Um, so I'm going to do a little screen share and talk about what we are as a DIY PhD. So we are prioritizing learning in our bodies, minds, spirits, habitats, and emotions. And this is quite different from Western education, which often prioritizes learning in the mind. And I think the emphasis on the mind and the supremacy of the human mind over all other forms of consciousness is one of the most toxic things about higher education as we know it. And by we, I mean those of us raised in this empire, this Western empire of the United States and other countries of European origin that promote things like competition in learning, either or, one right way, patriarchy, and all the other forms of white supremacy that show up in higher education. So the DIY PhD is coming back to our bodies, and we start each class with a movement practice, something to open up the channels in our bodies, get our blood flowing, get our breath pumping. And once we do that kind of honoring of our body as a temple and as a site of learning, it's so much easier to dip into the material. And when I say we're prioritizing learning in our spirits, that means that we're not just collaborating with our cohort of human beings here, but we're collaborating with our ancestor guides. And that doesn't mean we have to collaborate with all of our ancestors, because some of the ancestors have done some messed up stuff, but we get to reach out and connect to the ancestors who have our backs and who have liberation at the forefront of the ways they're helping us as well in the spirit realm. And that also goes to the spirits that we find in our habitats outside, in the water, and also to the artists and creators that have come before us, to the visionaries and activists who have lit our path, to all the people in the movement work, and to all the Black and Indigenous elders, to all the immigration rights activists. I could go on and on, but all of those spirits who are sort of our chosen ancestors or chosen spirit guides for what we do. Then when we're learning in our habitats, that means we are including the extension of our body, our ser. Tu ser is where you're living and the air that you're breathing. And so when we incorporate our habitats into our learning, it's again a way to get embodied and present with all of the beings that are contributing to our existence. And that goes for the plants as well. And even if we're in urban habitats, we're still receiving oxygen from our tree relatives outside. So we incorporate thank yous and gratitudes to our habitats in what we do, and we find ways to offer and support our habitats in return. And then finally, when we're prioritizing learning in our emotions, that means that we're not overriding what comes up for us in class. And um, we begin with a check in most classes, which involves just kind of, you know, taking off taking off our shoulders whatever we're carrying with us for that day and sharing how we're feeling. So we don't have to show up ignoring the the triggers that might come up throughout our weeks, or the grief that we're moving through, or the heartbreak. And also, we get to be present and celebrate what pleasures have been coming up for us, and what joys and what excitement is coming up in our life. So, our emotions, again, are part of our learning. They're part of our presence when we come. And so we don't ignore them, but we really honor them. And once we've checked in with our emotions, again, it's a way to clear so we can dive deeper into the desires lying at the heart of our fears, for example. Um, we, as a DRI PhD, are also releasing what no longer works for us, and we're reframing old stories. And that means that we have to look at that. We have to look at what's not working, and try to be as honest as we can about it, and as gentle as we can, because we might be having some habits or living in situations that we feel like don't work for us, but we're still in them for whatever reason, learning from them and doing the best we can to cope with all the different intersecting oppressions or violences or difficulties that we're facing today as humans. And um, when we're reframing old stories, that means that we're also looking at the old stories, or the harmful patterns, or the self deprecating talk, and finding a reframe that we can grow from. So we can name the old story, and then also name what the medicine might be of that old story, and what we want to grow, what new stories we want to grow from those roots. Um, and so we are connecting to our intuition, to our guides, and the deep desires at the heart of our fears. And so, what I love about the connection piece is that we don't have to come into the DIY PhD knowing what we want to do. In fact, again, that supremacy of the human mind knowing, I think, is what's gotten us into so much trouble here on the planet and with the climate right now. And so, what we get to do is sort of release that authority, and we get to go through practices and methodologies that connect us to our intuition, to, again, our guides, and again, what might be at the heart of our fears. And for me, that just takes off so much weight of having to figure it all out and know everything, so we can lean into trust and find it. And it's okay if it doesn't come easy. It's a process and it's a cycle. We are deepening trust in ourselves, the universe, and our paths. We are integrating our multi passions, changing realities and everyday lives in our learning. So, what I love about the DRI PhD is that you don't have to pick just one thing that you want to study. And in fact, that kind of like tunnel vision can ignore the context of what we want to learn. So, if we're interested in X, Y, and Z, let's say we're interested in multi-amory, plant medicine, and parenting, we can find the ways that those interests intersect. And that might be our unique, dissertation project that emerges down the road. And we don't know in what form it's going to take, but if we honor all of our multiple passions, there's going to be a mixing and a blending and a digesting that happens before, by the end of the year one, we really know what it is that we're studying. So it's a beautiful process to get there that involves honoring our multiple passions. And changing realities means that where we start with the DRI PhD in year one might be an interest that no longer holds our attention in a couple months, because there's changing realities all around us. So we get to follow what feels present and what feels resonant and alive, without having to hang on to the initial idea that might have been in a previous form of us or life on the planet too. So we get to be flexible and follow what's emerging, what's shifting, and what's coming up. And for David and I, especially when we started our DOA PhD, we wanted to follow joy. So that was like the main vibrant beacon for us continuing our program for 6 years. And then finally, everyday lives means that, we might have a birth in the family, we might have a death in the family, we might have a difficult housing situation, we might have an unexpected opportunity come up that we're excited about. So we follow, again, what's happening in our daily lives as part of the learning and not separate. So we're not in a vacuum, and we get to really work with what's showing up rather than trying to push it away or ignore it. We get to deepen and look at the context of everything. And these are some really important reminders for people that might be afraid of starting a deeper education program, a long-term education program. In a DIY PhD, you're never behind, and you're always invited to show up exactly as you are. And that affirmation means that if you have to skip a class or two, you don't have to feel like everyone's over here and you're back here trying to always catch up. You get to always show up however you're feeling, wherever you're at, and that's welcome and that's honored. We don't have to pretend to be anything other than that. In a DIY PhD, your DIY PhD is uniquely yours. No one is ahead of you. No one is behind. No one's doing it right. No one's doing it wrong. It's always, again, like an emergent process. And so that means too, things that I share about the DIY PhD might not hold true for you. And that's great. That's ideal because you're really finding what it is that resonates for you and your cohort. So there's no wrong way to do it. In a DIY PhD, there aren't hierarchies of concept and academia over experience and process. I think that's a typo, sorry. There's not a hierarchy of grammar, although some people, I totally get down with that too. We don't have to worry about these sort of canons and rules that came before us, because we can look at them and take what we like and what works from that, and then we get to mix it with ancestral knowledge and intuitive knowledge and embodied knowledge coming from the planet. In a DIY PhD, there will be cycles of learning and unlearning, knowing and not knowing. And this one gets me every time because I think I'm on a trajectory of like a linear learning process going from the unknown into I've mastered this subject, as they say, with a master's degree. What I find instead is that, like the seasons, like our rotation as a planet around the sun, we have cycles. And so we might learn just enough to then know how much we really don't know. And that's a good thing, or that's a real thing that we work with instead of trying to ignore that. So we might go through a season of 4 months where we feel like we just don't know. We feel like we're in some shadowlands. And instead of the shadowlands being a bad thing, the shadowlands are teachers too. And life wouldn't be here on the planet without gorgeous shadow darkness, the soil underneath the rocks. That's where moisture cultivates. So just like that, when we're in our not knowing dormant phases, there's something being cultivated under there that's beautiful and rich. And necessary. We can't always go, bloom, bloom, bloom. We got to root and rest. And in a DIY PhD, our shadows and emotions are our teachers. Our DIY PhDs are emergent and shifting. I pretty much have been talking about that the whole time. And I'll just go over what we start with in month 1 is the substrate, the soil. So we begin to get to know each other, mapping where we're at, where we're coming from. We look at our wildest dreams, our dream visions for our DIY PhDs. We look at our compost and we do ritual for release. So that way, the stuff that we don't want to carry into our DIY PhDs, we can begin processing, trying to let go of it and offer it into a transformation to grow something else. We do habitat love to get grounded in our place. We make offerings to our ancestors. We tend to our altars and we care for our homes and bodies. In week 3, we move through our stories, the roots of our being, our learning, the nooks of pain, experience, and pleasure in our bodies. Um, and in week 4, we start looking at our resources for research, which is an introduction to autoethnography, or the study of self and community. And we start mapping out our learning plans for the semester and what a decolonial praxis could look like. In other words, a methodology or a learning path that is holistic and whole, and that tends to all aspects of our being and our community. So that's just a little peek. I'll stop the share there. But just wanted to give a deeper orientation to anybody who's thinking about doing the DIY PhD, but still wasn't quite understanding what it's about. And I understand that's still pretty vague, but it's really a process that we find together. And this cohort that's coming together right now, I'm so excited about. Thank you if you've applied and are fully enrolled. So excited to work with you and get to know you better and what you're interested in. And if you're wanting to apply, we begin in 1 week. So get those applications in. I think we still have 4 spots available. And I can't wait to see all the other emergent DIY PhDs popping up around us. And it's not a proprietary thing. So if you want to go out and find your cohort and make your DIY PhD, you're so welcome to. And hit me up and let me know how it's going and share your experience in the eco scene with the tag DIY PhD if you want to. So thank you. If you have any questions, comment below and I'll answer them as soon as I can. I'm also available by DM. And that's it for now. Thinking of you in your journey, and grateful